All right, Juan. Happy coronavirus home confinement day. Number
Well,
what?
happy Easter.
Happy
It's
Easter.
Easter
Oh
as
yeah,
well.
almost
So
forgot.
yeah, yeah.
Happy Easter to you too. So we're trialing out Zoom today for the first time doing these things, but I quite like how it's going.
No,
Um,
my dog seems confident.
yeah, the ducks is good.
She's
Yeah,
we're gonna nail this one.
she's always there during these ones. I've never seen her there when we're having other meetings. I don't know. Maybe
No, no, she's always, but she's fine. It's just a very busy day, busy day.
she knows these ones go on YouTube, so she wants to be in the limelight. Okay, right. So we've covered quite a bit of stuff recently about alphas, mentality, broker-related subjects during our last two or three conversations. But we touched upon the whole concept of managers versus traders, but we never really elaborated on it. So I thought maybe we would dedicate some time
Well,
to
managers versus investors, yeah. So
managers
I think
versus
that's two.
investors. Sorry,
That's
yes,
what is the difference between a trader
and a manager,
and a manager, and what
and
is the
then
difference between an
mm,
investor and a
and a
manager?
manager. Yeah, and
And let's
we've
try and
touched
get some
upon this stuff.
terminology here.
Yeah, we've touched upon this stuff, but we haven't really focused on it. So let's do that today, if you could please.
Okay, so it's probably makes up for even a couple of series, but the first one. And by the way, all that we say is open to debate, right? So this is not like a
Yeah,
blunt
yeah, yeah,
lecture or
yeah.
anything, or anything. Because we're like last week we learned we're all alphas, and this is an exchange amongst equals. So like, if I had the solution, I wouldn't be posting it on YouTube. I would put it on the web page,
Yeah,
which is
precisely,
part of what we're
precisely.
trying to do here.
So
So
anybody watching this, we're not nobody's preaching anything. This is very much a
no,
request
no,
for
no.
comments. So RFC,
No, no,
RFC.
and sometimes I speak or I shout like I'm, but it's just because I'm passionate. It's not like I'm trying to
Yeah,
kill
yeah,
anyone.
yeah, yeah. We know that. Let's move on.
Yeah, no, okay, thanks. So the first one is what's the difference between a trader and a manager? That's
Mm,
important. Um, the first one, we've now got some seriously heavyweight investors in our board, and
yeah.
one of them said, "Look, trader, and if your daughter came to you and told you she was going to marry a trader 20 years ago, you'd be happy. If your daughter came to you and told you she's going to marry a trader today, you'd be like, dump the
Hell
gambler.
no.
Okay, so like just cut him loose." So that's one element, and words actually matter.
Yeah.
And then we had this kind of, what was it, Ali, yesterday? 2 hour internal discussion
Oh
on our
goodness.
like
Oof.
very painful one. So
But
we had
very
this
productive.
painful internal, very productive. So this painful internal meeting on, okay, we're all agreed that this is for alphas. If you don't know what the hell we're talking about, read watch that video, because that makes an interesting reading, watching for itself.
Hmm.
So if Darwinex is by alphas for alphas, then what the heck is an alpha?
Yeah.
And what does that mean to our legacy trader slash investor terminology?
It's really important
And I have
to
to,
form this distinction because it can be misconstrued unless we properly define what alpha means to us. So
okay,
yeah,
so well, I mean, but we did that on that alpha too, so like we don't
yeah,
need to repeat that. So alpha is
yeah, yeah,
somebody who, it's a obsessive compulsive disorder for self improvement. That's
yeah,
that's
pretty much.
that's us, right? It's OCD.
I can
That's
vouch
the,
for the OCD for myself. I don't know.
yeah, no, same here. So it's alpha means obsessive compulsive disorder at anything, and
Mhm.
since this is Darwinex, it's OCD for market junkies. Okay, so
Yeah.
we're talking about the subspecial market junkies special part of OCD,
Yeah.
and when it comes to that, there's traders and investors are the legacy terms.
Hmm.
We are trying to set the right terminology, and by the way, anybody who's, you're welcome to suggest. Now, first point is, what is to me the difference between a trader and a manager?
Okay.
Now, what is not the difference? No, both are trading the markets, as in punting the markets or analyzing the markets, whichever you want to look at. But like they all click buttons, or they all write algos. Okay, so
Hmm.
that's not the difference. Now, the difference, in my humble opinion, is what is your goal when you approach the markets, and specifically, are you capable of drawing the distinction between the manager me
Yeah.
and punting me? Because let's face it, no offense, Ali, I'm not a trader, but I mean, there is an element of punting, right?
Of
So,
course. Yeah.
it's
Yeah. Big time.
it's all about taking risk return optimized punts, but they are punts. Okay,
Yeah, they are.
so and of course, if you've done your job, then eventually the numbers go in your favor, and then it works out. Okay, but it is punting,
Yeah.
and then of course, as
Educated
such,
guesswork. Yeah.
it's well, it's not guesswork. It's it's informed guesswork. Okay, so like
Informed guesswork.
at least I'd like to think. Okay, so that element is there. There's always going to be the uncertainty, and there's an element
Yeah.
of risk, and you have to be a risk taker.
Yeah.
Okay, now both managers and risk takers, like managers and traders are risk takers, but
Yeah.
the a trader does not dissociate his savings like the guy who funds the activity from
Hmm.
the guy who punts the activity, and they are one and the same thing. And he's quite okay. It's like, oh shit, there goes $500. Okay,
Yeah.
and it doesn't really matter because it's mine.
Hmm.
Okay, and that is the trader mentality. And in this, I'm not saying should make it to the Oxford Dictionary, but like that's what it
Yeah.
says to me. So that's trading is punting me and capital allocating me are one and the same thing.
Hmm.
Now, for me, managing means you make the psychological distinction between punting me and capital allocating me
Yeah.
in a way such that punting me knows the first job definition is return of capital.
End of. Yeah.
We're certainly here to generate return on capital, but if it comes at the expense of return of capital, then we're not doing that because that's a very expensive punt to take.
Yeah.
Okay, so the difference between a trader and a manager is a trader doesn't think of return of capital first and foremost, a manager does.
Hmm.
And if you look at it this way, then you start by managing your own money and you keep at it for long enough, well enough, then at some point others will trust you and give you their manage for you to manage. And at that point, you will have become a manager in the kind of traditional sense. But you have to become a manager. Like the first jump is not from 1 to 2; it's from 0 to 1. Okay,
Yeah.
so if
Yeah.
you're trading, you have no investors because you're not. There's no one thinking of return of capital on
And
board.
it's a different mentality altogether because a trader will
It's a
often.
completely different mentality, and that's when it comes to the positioning for Darwinex, that's the biggest jump because a lot of people
Yeah.
don't even make this leap because they don't even know that the right business model is to take investors on board. Okay, but the biggest jump is not from 1 to 2, in my humble opinion, or not from 1 investor to 2 investors. It's from 0 investors to 1 investor.
Yes. 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 I agree
Okay,
with that.
so a trader is worthy of no investment, not even his own. A
Hmm.
manager is at the very least worthy of his own investment.
Hmm. True. I
Okay.
agree with that. Yeah.
Okay, so in that sense, at Darwinex, we're looking primarily for Darwin managers. So people who produce an investable asset which has known risk profile
Hmm.
and aspires at some point in the future to prove an initially downward sloping evolution, then stable evolution, and then hopefully positive evolution. Because that's the journey. I mean, when you start riding a bike, the first thing you do is fall flat on your nose
Hmm.
any number of times. Okay, then you keep going a bit like this, and at some point, depending on how good you are and how committed you are, eventually you might win the Tour de France. But it always starts with a bloody nose.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And in
Absolutely.
that sense, it's a process. Like, this whole thing, he's a winner, he's a loser. Well, no one's a winner.
No one's a
It's
winner.
like,
No.
it's just a question of how much time you've put into being a winner and how long you can keep it up. Because that's the other one. It's it's
Yeah.
Darwinian. Lewis Hamilton, he fell flat on his nose. Then he became 7 world champion, and at some point he'll be in a wheelchair and he'll be dead. If you take so
Yeah.
just like all of us. Okay, so it's
Yeah.
a process.
Precisely.
There's nothing. It's called life. Okay, and there's an element of Darwinian selection to it. Thus the name Darwinex.
Yeah.
So Darwinex is for alphas, and for us, alpha means manager. One of the things is manager is a Darwin manager, somebody who manages his own strategy in the hope of keeping his own capital, growing his own capital, and eventually persuading third parties to join in the bandwagon and allocating third party capital to it and paying a success fee for it, and then therefore enabling
Scaling the business. Yeah.
scaling, leveraging with equity capital instead of debt capital.
That
Okay,
capital. Correct. Yeah.
so that is the difference between the trader and a manager.
Hmm.
Now, and this is the one that's been, and we've been going sidetracked at this one for like 8 years now. Okay, so Darwin investors need, so Darwin managers need investment capital.
Yeah.
No question about it. You need assets under management to get there. Now, but we're talking about an unproven startup creating unproven technology to back unproven managers, and we're hoping to get investors. And I'm going to explain what the word investor means to me, and what's the difference between an investor and a manager.
Okay.
An investor is somebody who's willing to contribute capital, but not time, with a view towards obtaining financial results. Okay, so I'm committing my capital, but you tell me what I do, because I'm not putting time into this. That's what I hire you for.
Mm-hmm. Understood. Yeah.
Now, so those guys, when they come to Darwinex, Darwinex is not for them,
Mm-hmm.
because Darwinex stands for the Darwin Exchange.
Mm-hmm.
We are an exchange, and we're not here to tell any investor, to advise any investor on which Darwins to pick. We're here to provide all the disclosure that can be provided, and to manage the risk so that they know what they're buying, which is an asset with a certain value at risk and a certain set of characteristics, which we disclose, because this is about curating the asset and disclosing its characteristics.
And this
But in
hopefully
no way,
answers 100 questions that we get often in the community from
yeah, no, but this
individuals
is,
exploring the data set, that we're not going to advise you how
we're
to
never
go
going to
pick the
advise you
right Darwin.
for a whole boatload of reasons. The first one is
Yeah.
because we are by alphas for alphas, and advising you means we think ourselves superior to you,
To you,
and
yeah,
we don't
which
think
is
that.
not the
That's,
case
to
at
begin
all.
with, that's not the case. Point
Mm.
one. Point two is we make part of our revenues from brokerage, which is a function of rotation,
Mm-hmm.
and different strategies generate different rotation. Meaning, we would have a conflict of interest to push the ones that have higher rotation because they make us more money, and we
Yeah.
don't want anybody being in a position to accuse us of that. Okay, so we cannot remain neutral as an exchange and advise at the same time, and therefore we stay an exchange.
Yeah.
Okay, and as such, an investor who comes here and is not willing to put time to do the legwork, which, by the way, there's nothing wrong with that,
Mm-hmm.
but we're not for them,
Yeah, it's understood.
because we're an exchange. Okay, now that doesn't mean that at some point we will have a layer of managers, and I'll come back to that in a second, who will then harvest alpha on top, harvest portfolio alpha on top of the Darwin alpha,
Mm-hmm.
and then eventually sell that on to third-party investors who only put in the capital but not the time. And that's absolutely fine, because just as there are fund managers who source stocks from the Nasdaq exchange, then
Mm-hmm.
combine that and go on to sell fund management services. But we are a different part of the value chain. We are an exchange. We are the
Yeah.
exchange layer. We're not the fund management layer. Okay,
Bringing parties together, not
or at least the Darwin
advising.
Exchange isn't. That doesn't mean that at some point we might choose to create another business unit, which is completely separate from the exchange business unit, which has no privileged access to any of the tools or anything else, who competes at arm's length from this thing to deliver value on that. And we'll
Mm-hmm.
come back to that in a second. That's the Darwinex Labs business unit. But the
Okay.
exchange, when you come to the Darwin Exchange and you ask for investment advice, we'll say, sorry, mate, wrong door. Okay, just go somewhere else. This is the male's the male toilet, not the female toilet. No, in here, you have to, when you take a leak, you have to, you have to stand. You don't have to sit. Okay, that's just how it works. Okay,
I am so
and
not editing this out. This is gold.
yeah, no, but but that's the thing, so wrong door. Okay,